I do want to illustrate what top and bottom miking of toms sounds like. It looks like there's a bunch of tom hits sort of at the beginning of this song. So yeah, let's just hear the rack top for a second. Okay, now let's hear the rack bottom. You certainly wouldn't use the rack bottom as your primary tom sound, but together, adding the bottom in there, let's bring the bottom up a little bit more just so you can tell what's going on a little better. Together, bringing the bottom in adds a certain three-dimensionality to it, but it also brings out a lot of sympathetic resonance, like with the kick. And I'm going to get into editing the toms in a bit to remove some of that sympathetic resonance that's going to muddy up your kick sound. All right, probably a little too much bottom tom in there, but you know, it does sort of add some three-dimensionality to the sound. And we can make that even a little bit better when, according to my notes, the rack bottom mic should slide in by 29 samples. So let's do that real quick. And set that to 29, and then delete. You can see that track scoot back a little bit. And then also my floor bottom is going to do a similar thing by negative 55 samples. Okay, so now I have done a little bit of phase alignment or track alignment with all of my close mics. Now, some people will take that a step further and will begin to do some alignment of overheads and room mics with the close mics. I personally don't do that. I feel as though you get sort of a greater stereo spread, a greater sense of space when there's a subtle time lag between the close mics and the overheads and the room mics. Some people will also do the opposite and will actually push those mics out even further to give it a greater sense of space. And depending on the size room that you're recording in and how reflective it is, you may choose to scoot that stuff around. For this session, I'm not going to be scooting any of that stuff around, but I will check the polarity of all this stuff again to make sure that the polarity of the snare in relation to the overheads is still correct. Now, when I do that in my studio, I will do that on the analog mixing console because a lot of analog gear will flip the polarity of a signal for some unknown reason, or maybe you have something screwed up in the wiring of your studio where it passes signal properly, but it, you know, inadvertently inverts the polarity of the signal. So as you're patching in new pieces of gear, particularly in the analog domain, you want to double check the polarity of your signal. Anything that has a phase relationship, you want to double check as you bring in new pieces of gear. I'm going to skip that stuff for now, but just be careful with that as you're doing stuff on your own. Okay, so that is phase alignment. We've already soaked up the vibe. We've done some phase alignment. You may want to do a little more level setting and adjusting after having done your phase alignment. I'm feeling pretty good about it now. And final editing, you might want to take a look at the heads and the tails of songs. There might be some cymbal decay somewhere at the end of the song or in the middle of the song that needs to be trimmed. There might be stick licks at the beginning of the song that you might want to trim. Take care of all that stuff early on. Double check your polarity. And then the next stage will be tom editing. Before we do that, I just want to, let's quickly just listen to the raw drum track so you have an idea about where I'm at this stage in my mix. All right, so again, I mix on an analog console, but you know, it'll sound similar to this, and with no gear, no hardware, no plugs on anything yet. That's basically where I'm starting. So there's this thing that I do with tom editing that I haven't seen a whole lot of other people do, and I think it's pretty neat, so I want to share it with you guys. And the reason why I do it is let's go back and listen to my rack tom and floor tom tracks in solo. So there's a bunch of hi-hat in there especially, and some of all the other cymbals, as well as a bunch of sympathetic resonance from the snare and the bass drum. Depending on the style of music you're doing, you might want to maintain a lot of that sympathetic resonance. It can give the drums a sense of size and space. But if you're doing something, especially something with really dense guitars, that is just sort of background noise that muddies the sound of the drum. So I prefer to get all my character from my room mics and have my close mics be a little more direct and punchy. So for this band, I'm going to pretty heavily edit the toms so that only the tom signal is coming through when the toms are struck, and when the toms are not being struck, they're silent. I don't do it on all projects, but on this project, that's what I'm going to do. The first thing I'm going to do, just as a safety, is first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make a group of the top and bottom rack tom. So let's call that tom. And then I'm going to make a group of the top and bottom mics of the floor tom. Let's call that floor. And then the next thing I'm going to do is duplicate the rack tracks and the floor tracks so that I have an alternate playlist that's unedited. So if I make any mistakes, I can refer back to that unedited playlist. Or if I decide after the fact that the editing that I've done is too heavy-handed, I can then refer to the unedited track, bring that back in, and then use both tracks in my mix, which will give me a sort of almost like a wet-dry blend of unedited toms versus edited toms. And that's one technique you can do to make edited toms sound more natural. One of the big drawbacks to editing toms, especially if a drummer has a brash cymbal positioned very close to a tom mic, is if they're a light tom hitter, they might do some fill that has a big crash cymbal in it. They get to the floor tom, and then when you turn on the floor tom track with your edit, the decay of an adjacent cymbal comes out of nowhere, and that can feel really unnatural. So in those cases, you might not want to edit toms, or you might want to have the unedited tom track blended in with your edited tom track. I was able to position the kit, and Tony was willing to work with me enough that I could position everything on here so we don't have a ton of bleed of cymbals into tom mics, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem on this thing. All right, so let me duplicate, and you'll see that the names of those tracks change. So now I'm working on a duplicate track. Just for simplicity, I'm going to go back to the original track to do my edits, because I don't think I'm going to pull out the duplicates. Let's make them a little bigger so we can see what's going on. And yeah, there we go. I think I'm going to go back to medium here. And I'm going to, so I'm going to solo the tom tracks. I'm also going to solo my overheads just so I have something happening all the time as a guide. And now I'm going to just start playing these tracks. I've got my, see this little AZ guy over here? That means keyboard shortcuts is turned on. So you want to make sure your keyboard shortcuts are turned on, and this feature up here is called tab to transient. You want to make sure that feature is turned on. Okay, so I see he does this fill that has a floor tom hit and a rack tom hit. And it's followed by a cymbal crash here. So what I'm going to do on the tom track, tab over to the beginning of the tom track. So tab to transient allows Pro Tools to find the beginning of any transient. It's not always super accurate, so if something seems off, you can zoom in and do this manually. And I'm going to press B on the keyboard, which is a shortcut for separate region. Then tab over to the next transient, which is a snare and cymbal hit simultaneously. Hit B again. I'm going to do the same thing on the floor tom track. and then tab over to where I know that hit is. Okay, then I'm going to go over shortly before the end of those hits and press G, which is a shortcut for fade out. You can also draw a window around this and press F, which is a different way to do a fade out. So now I have a quick fade on these toms. I can go back to go back to my hand tool, grab that stuff before the tom hit, delete it. Grab that stuff before the tom hit, delete that. Now I'm ready to move on to the next tom hit. So let's just take a listen. All right, so he does it again. It's the same pattern. So I already know what to do. In fact, I'll just go ahead and do the first few of these, as I know what's going to happen because I'm already pretty familiar with the song. And I think I missed one. It's always weird working on an unfamiliar computer because the tracking's set a little differently, so I'm kind of a little clumsy right now, and I apologize for that. So let's gone through and done a bunch of these. Did I miss one? No. Yeah. And then we can grab our hand tool and remove a whole bunch of this stuff that we don't need. Whoops, looks like I didn't fade those ones. So now I'm just going to, I'll just do both at the same time with an F. All right, so zoom out a little bit and let's hear how that sounds. Okay, so a lot of people do what I just did. I'm going to take this one step further and do something that's a little bit less common. Because when I listen back to that, I hear, yeah, the toms are edited and that's great. I just have the attack, but I'm also, since these are real big toms that were kind of resonant, I'm missing that decay of the toms. If I were to make my fade outs longer, I would preserve the decay of the tom, but I would also be hearing that sort of brash attack of the cymbal that comes after the toms. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off my tom groups for a second here, and then I'm going to duplicate my top rack track. Okay, so I'll go to Track, Duplicate, and what this does is makes an exact copy of that rack track and will allow me to the opportunity to process that track independently from the original. So now I have rack top dupe, and I'll do the same thing with the floor tom. So floor top dupe, and I'm going to go ahead and relabel these. So now rack top is going to be called rack high, and the rack top duplicate is going to be called rack low. The rack bottom I'm going to leave, and then floor top is going to be floor high. Floor top dupe is going to be called floor low. Okay. Now, for those of you who have some live sound experience, you'll be familiar with the concept of a crossover. It's not something often used in pro audio, at least in recording, but it's something that we can use. We use that in pro audio when we're dealing with multi-band compression, but we don't typically have a whole lot of control over our crossovers. I'm going to make my own crossover out of two instances of the Digi one-band EQ, so that I have independent control of the high track. So I'm just going to delete my solos there and then listen to just the rack high now. Okay, so that's the broadband rack signal that's been edited. I'm going to use EQ3 one band, and I'm going to set a high pass filter, and I'm going to set that to 6 dB per octave, and then I'm going to choose a frequency. The various frequencies will work. Let's try 390. Okay, that should let that'll thin out the tone quite a bit. Okay, let's go a little lower. Let's try 330 hertz. So right in the low mid area. Okay, a little bit fuller. Now, I'm going to, by pressing Alt and selecting the plugin, I'm going to drag it down to the rack low track. And I'm not going to change any settings with the slope or the frequency, but I'm going to change the filter type to a low pass. So let's hear what the rack low track sounds like. Okay, so that's the low component of the sound, and you can imagine that if that was running all the time, you wouldn't hear a ton of cymbal on that track. Okay, now I'm going to change around the way in which I'm managing the rack and floor tom groups. So I'll go to my tom group, which contains rack, high, low, and bot, which is short for bottom, and I'm just going to remove the high stuff from the equation right now. That'll allow me to edit the rack low and rack bottom as a group together without editing the rack high. I'm going to do the same thing for my floor tom track, remove high from the equation, and now I'm only dealing with floor low and floor bot. And so that I don't accidentally grab it, I'm going to shrink the size of rack high and shrink the size of floor high, but still have all my same stuff soloed. The low components are soloed, and the overheads are soloed just for presence, and I'll still be able to hear the rack high. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is grab my bracket tool and extend the length of the fade for just the low tracks. And how far you want to do this is really up to you. I'm just kind of doing an arbitrary amount right now. I should probably do a little shorter. And this will let you restore some of the resonance of the tom track, but still get the cymbals out of the way. Now you are going to be bringing in, oops, looks like I never faded that one. You are going to be bringing in some of that sympathetic resonance with the kick, so you have to be careful. And you may choose to only edit the rack low and not edit rack bot, for example, or floor bot. You might want to leave floor bot faded back with the floor high track if the sympathetic resonance of the toms and the kick are too much for you. So now let's hear how that sounds. Oops, I missed one. You know what? I'm going to leave that missed one in there just because it might make an interesting illustration of the difference between these two things. I think we'll actually be able to hear that difference a little bit more if I turn off the overhead tracks. Oh wait, I forgot to do my EQ on the floor tom. That's why that sounded bad. So I'll drag just the same EQ settings onto floor high and floor low, and let's just double check that. Yeah, high passing the high mic and low passing the low mic, and let's hear that again. Okay, so we're getting some resonance from the toms, but we're removing some harshness of the cymbals. And if that is too severe for you guys, then you can blend in your dry tom tracks back in with your edited tom tracks. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I had to say about tom editing. Next, I'm going to start talking about what I call turbo tracks on the kick and snare, which is a term I picked up from Matthew Ellard, who did most of the engineering on Converge's Jane Doe. Sort of one of the closest things I had to a mentor. Are there any questions we should cover before moving on, or can I get into that?
Excuse me. We had one from Parkins saying, just wondering why you wouldn't gate the toms to avoid heavy editing.
Yeah, if I don't have a whole lot of time, and there's a big distinction between sort of the volume envelope of the toms versus the cymbals bleeding into the tom mics, then yeah, gating is a perfectly viable way to do that. Typically toms aren't struck all that often, so it's not usually a big deal to edit them. You can certainly edit them a lot more accurately than you can gate them. I'm going to get into gating actually just in a couple minutes now. With a kick and snare, they're being struck so often that it's not worthwhile to gate them. But with toms, you can be a whole lot more accurate by editing them. But if I'm in a time crunch, then I'll reach for a gate on the tom.